Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the IceCream4PRs podcast. My name is Jeff Nippard, and joining me today I have a special guest from Australia. His name is John Paul Cauchi. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey mate, how you going? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Like I said, I really appreciate you coming on the show. So why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your training background, your academic background, and I know you're a coach as well, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, sure. So, for those who might not know, I'm a competitive powerlifter. So I haven't done any bodybuilding or anything like that, but I've competed in powerlifting for a little while. And like yourself, Jeff, I lift in the IPF, so the International Powerlifting Federation. Here in Australia, it's the Powerlifting Australia. So I've got that T-shirt here. Yeah, so I lived in the Powerlifting Australia, and I've been competing for a few years. Now I'm 22, so I'm still a junior, but I have been lifting for a little while. Before that, like through my youth, I guess, I did lots of like random stuff. So I did like a bit of track, like athletics, played like Australian rules football, which a lot of people might not be familiar with, but did a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. And I'm quite a small person. I'm not very tall. I'm 5'3". So I wasn't very good at the ball sports. I wasn't very good at like running. So then I kind of said, I need to lift some weights. I need to get stronger if I want to be competitive in kind of contact sports. And then did a little bit of that and realized, hey, I'm better at lifting weights than I am at like running around a field. So I might try and pursue that. So did that for a little while. So at the moment, I've been to 3 World Championships Raw. I compete mainly Raw. I have done a little bit of equipped stuff. But I lift mainly Raw, so I've been to 3 Worlds. My first one in 2013 in Russia, I came second, and then I won last year and I won this year as a junior in the 66 class, or the 145 pounds, for those listening for the freedom units. So yeah, I've done a couple of cool things. I've got a couple of sport world records. I got one sport world record, to be honest. A couple of deadlift world records. So yeah, I've done a couple of cool things. In terms of my academics, I studied at the University of Melbourne. I'm actually wearing the University of Melbourne thing here now. What's up there? I studied Bachelor of Science and I majored in anatomy. So anatomy, physiology is kind of like my area. It wasn't kind of like sports science specialist, but I obviously have a bit of interest in sports science, but it's been mainly in anatomy, physiology, so that's kind of my area. And I do a bit of coaching as well. I coach out of the gym that I train out of here in Melbourne at Obsidian Strength, one of the bigger powerlifting clubs. So I'm pretty lucky enough to be able to do that and kind of combine my passions for obviously science and anatomy and movement with what I kind of love doing in my spare time, which is lifting weights. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. I've definitely got academic interests in anatomy as well. I actually wasn't introduced to it until I was in school for dentistry, actually, for a couple of years, and then I realized that I loved the anatomy more than I loved the dentistry. So that might be something that I actually turn back to at some point down the road. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I love studying the human body. So let's get into some weight classes stuff. JP, I saw your video on YouTube. If any of our listeners haven't seen it, I strongly recommend that they go and give it a watch in case they have any questions or concerns about making a weight class for a powerlifting meet. But I was hoping maybe we could get into the details here a little bit in terms of your general approach and how you go about making weight for a meet. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said before, I compete in the 66 kilo class, or the 145 pounds. And in powerlifting, there's, I think in the men's, like 8 weight classes, and it's the second smaller. So there's the 59s and the 66s. So I lift in pretty much one of the smaller classes. And to be competitive in the smaller classes, particularly, big weight cuts are almost mandatory, I'm going to say. Like, if you want to be competitive to the best of your ability at an international level, you kind of have to be cutting a little bit of weight. I'm very competitive, obviously. And one of the things I'm really big on, not only through powerlifting, but through everything, is taking advantage, I guess, of every avenue you have to be as competitive as possible. And when I first started lifting, that was one of the things that I wanted to do. Was I read the rule book like 3, 4, 5 times over, because I wanted to know every rule. I wanted to know every little thing I can manipulate to give myself the best possibility, like the best possible result. Because powerlifting isn't necessarily who's the strongest, it's who's the best powerlifter. And it doesn't matter what it takes to get there, obviously, within the rules. So cutting weight is obviously something that I've really taken extremely, and I have made, I think, a bit of a reputation for being a big weight cutter. So I think some of the bigger cuts that I've done at Worlds, I cut about 5 kilos or 11 pounds. I had my junior nationals in August, where I cut about 6 kilos or 12 to 13 pounds, and I actually woke up on the day of the competition 2.7 kilos. So what's that? 6 pounds over. So I woke up in the morning of over like 2.7 kilos over. So big cuts are what I'm a big fan of. I just feel like that's the best way to do things.
Right.
Yeah, go on.
Oh yeah, so I was gonna say like I find that really interesting. I guess if you were gonna get some pushback from people, they would say that the more weight that you cut or the more drastic you take your cut, then your performance is going to be impaired as a result of that. Is that anything that you've noticed yourself or maybe with your athletes?
Yeah, 100%. So, like Jeff, like thanks for mentioning before. I've got a video on YouTube called "How to Cut Weight." I think it's called "How to Cut Weight Like a Pro." So, if you have any questions on specifically what I do to actually cut the weight, feel free to check that out. But I also made a video not too long ago called on YouTube on my channel "Heavier is Better," and it was pretty much kind of addressing what you just asked about what's the take on how heavy you should be, and like obviously there's going to be an impairment in performance when you do cut weight. And is that impairment, I guess what you're trying to say is that loss in performance worth the slight performance increase you see from being heavier? And I'm going to say yes it is, because, well, watch my video, heavier is better. but it definitely is. Like, for the most part, bigger people lift bigger weights. That's kind of why the sport of powerlifting is split into weight classes. And the weight that you lose, I think it's really important. I think one of the things that people get confused about quite consistently is, and you probably understand this a little bit better than most, Jeff, is that the cut that you do, the weight that you lose in the weight cut has to all be transient. It has to be temporary. It can't be a physical like loss in mass. You can't lose muscle tissue or fat tissue in 2 or 3 days. Like, it doesn't work.
Right.
You can't possibly burn that many calories in 3 days to lose fat. Or lose muscle mass. And if you do, that's what's really going to hinder your performance. But if you can like empty yourself of fluids, right? If you can empty your gut of all the stuff that's in your gut, or if you can reduce your like literal weight temporarily and then come back up, then the performance drop will be very minimal, and the I guess the benefit of being heavier is there. I mean, like a perfect example is at the junior nationals that I mentioned earlier in August that I competed at. I weighed in at 66.00. 10 minutes before weighing started. 10 minutes before weighing started, I was still 66.10, so I was still 100 grams over. I walked out into the warm-up room and screamed, "Does anybody have any chewing gum?" Chucked some chewing gum in my mouth. Chew, 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 spit, 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 chew, 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 spit, spit, spit. I was lot number 1, lucky enough, or lot number 3. Jumped on the scale, 66.00. And before I stepped onto the platform for my first squat, I weighed myself, like after halfway through my warm-ups, I weighed myself nude again, and I was 69.5. And before my deadlifts, I was 71 again. So all the weight comes back, like if you refeed properly, of course. So the weight needs to come back, and the performance benefits are very much real. All you need to do is compare myself, for example, on the day of my of junior nationals, to all the guys I was competing in the same weight class. Like, I weighed the same as some of these people, but I'm genuinely bigger. Like, you look at me and you go, like, you are physically bigger than right next to you. Although the scales say you weigh 200 grams more, you know what I mean? Because that's the benefit. Like, I'm bigger than you. Of course I'm going to lift more weights than you. So that's where I just see the benefit coming from. Of course, there's going to be impairment in performance. If you cut too hard, don't rehydrate properly, there's a whole bunch of finer points. But for the most part, if you do it right, yeah, 100%, there's some very potent, I guess, benefits to cutting weight and being bigger than your competitors.
Right, right. So when you say heavier is better, you mean heavier in your training, right?
Yeah, well, heavier a person. Like the cut itself isn't the benefit, it's the result of being bigger than people. Like,
Yeah.
if I step on the platform at 71 kilos and the guy that I'm competing against weighs 67 kilos, like, I'm literally 5% heavier than him or 4% heavier. So my total will reflect that. My total will, in theory, be 3 or 4% more. Like, it's just how it is. So if you can be heavy in training and then still be heavy in competition, but only, make weight for that brief period in time, then there's your benefit, I guess.
Right, right. So let's talk about the difference between, say, doing a prolonged cut into a meet. So say you take 12 weeks, slowly lose, say, 6 to 10 pounds of body fat by being in a caloric deficit over the course of those 12 weeks, versus what you do, which is lose the, say, I don't know, 5 to 10 pounds in 2 or 3 days. Which I know which approach you favor, right?
Very obvious.
And yeah, I think I would be convinced that that probably would lead to less performance detriments over the long term than being in a prolonged caloric deficit and then not doing any water manipulation or anything like that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So I guess what you're trying to say is, say for example, a 66 kilo guy was 71 kilos out, 12 weeks out.
Yeah.
Rather than procrastinating and leave it to the last day, like I kind of do with my weight cuts and like I kind of do with my exams, you should probably start a little bit earlier, right? Like start your assignments a little bit earlier. I agree that the caloric deficit thing and losing weight is good because, well, it has its place, but I just prefer because if you lose weight, say you start at 71 and you, over the course of 12 weeks, lose 3 kilos of mass, when you come into the competition weighing 68 kilos, you are smaller than you could have been. Like you could have just been 71. That's the kind of weight loss that I mentioned before of genuine weight loss, like losing actual fat and potentially losing actual muscle mass. When I would just say, don't lose that fat and don't lose that muscle mass, because fat's kind of a good thing. Like fat supports strength, fat supports recovery. So losing fat is a detriment to your training. Don't lose it. Keep the fat, keep the muscle as much as you can, and lose water at the last second. So I'd probably say, if you're going to do that, train at 22 pounds, 25 pounds above weight class. Then over 12 weeks, then you might want to cut through a caloric deficit, cut some mass, but still come in heavy. Like a week out, you should still be like 10 or 15 pounds over your weight class, and then just do it all in one day and then come back up again. Right. Particularly if you've got a 24-hour weigh-in, like that would be the dream. But in a 2-hour weigh-in, it's still possible. So yeah, I'm just very much a fan of not necessarily being. It's not the being heavier in the training or being heavier 2 days out that's the benefit. It's being heavier on the platform. It's standing next to your opponent in the warm-up room, bigger than he is, and saying, I'm bigger than you. I'm going to lift more weights than you. Like, you know what I mean? So like being bigger is a good thing. It's just how it is.
I do think it's also a good idea to be bigger during training, though, because from a bodybuilding perspective, I mean, I've seen it, and there'll come a point at which further reductions in body fat will lead to detriments to a greater degree than your Wilks would improve because of the weight loss. You know what I mean? Like there'll come a point where your Wilks will be going up and up and up because you're dropping weight and you haven't started losing strength yet, or at least you haven't lost much strength. And then there'll come a point in your cut where your strength loss exceeds your Wilks improvement.
You lose strength faster than you're losing body fat, like weight.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously you want to avoid that point if you're going to try to cut into the meat.
Yeah, exactly right.
But I like the idea of eating a lot, as much as you can handle, and I'm assuming that's what you do in your preparation for the meet, all the way up until 3 days out or whenever you start doing your manipulation, right?
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, Jeff, because a lot of people make that mistake. That's what they kind of stuff up on, and that's what causes the big detriments you see in performance that you see from guys that cut big weights. So you'll see people say, "Oh, the weight cut really affected me. You know, I missed my second squat, my second bench. I only got one squat, one bench, one deadlift, or 2 deadlifts. You know, the weight cut really affected me." And it's the eating prior to the weigh-in and the eating prior to the weight cut specifically that stuffs people up. So let's use that example again of what you said of the caloric deficit thing. Is guys go in a caloric deficit, say for example it's 2 weeks out or maybe 10 days out, and they're still a little bit over. They're still 4 kilos over, 3 kilos over. And we're talking about someone that's not very advanced. Like for me, if I was 4 kilos over, I'd stress out and say, well, I'm a little bit light. Like I need to eat. Like I'm too light, you know, because I'm experienced and I know what I need to weigh, and I don't want to weigh 4 kilos over. I want to weigh 5 kilos over. But let's say you've got someone that's a little bit more intermediate, and they look at their weight and they go, whoa, I'm 3 kilos over still. How am I going to get down? So instead of being in a small caloric deficit, they freak out and they like drop the calories even more. And then they're eating less. It's a week out. They've lost another kilo over that week. A lot of it was probably water anyway. I'm still 2 kilos over. What do? Cut the calories harder. it's 3 days out, no, or 4 days out, no carbs, a little bit of protein, and then it becomes a day out. They're still a kilo over. They cut their water, and all of a sudden their weight just plummets because they haven't been eating, they haven't been intaking any sodium. They cut their water, and all of a sudden their weight plummets. They weigh in underweight, which you actually quite see often. Is instead of just making weight, they weigh a kilo under. Yeah. And the major problem is that they've been cutting for 2 weeks, and it's just impossible to regain all the losses that you just had in the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's impossible to gain. One of the things that I really advocate, and I actually didn't mention this in my YouTube video, so for those that are listening, lucky you guys, you got a special little bonus tip here, is depending on the person, I highly, highly recommend that something between 36 to 60 hours out before the weigh-in, you have an enormous meal, like a gigantic meal. Like, I don't care if you're 4 kilos over, 10 kilos over, or 1 kilo over, you have the biggest meal of your life. Like, you stuff your face until you cannot breathe, have 5,000 calories in one sitting. Like, you eat as much as you can, because if you're, depending on the person again, 36 to 60 hours out, that's enough time for that mass of food to pass through your system, so that food isn't in your system. If you have, again, Jeff will know this better than I do, nutrition is not exactly my area, but if you have, say, a 3,000 calorie sitting, like, that's not going to add fat to your body, like in one meal. Like, one meal isn't enough. Like, 3,000 caloric surplus isn't going to add a significant amount of fat to your system. You're not going to weigh heavier.
You're absolutely right, yeah.
Yeah, it takes a prolonged period of caloric surplus to put on weight, right? Not just one damn meal. Like, you're not going to put on weight on one damn meal.
No.
So what you're going to do, though, is give yourself heaps of energy. It's going to, like, it really, really does help your endocrine system. It helps your energy levels. It just helps you recover. And then it's from that meal on that you start your cut. That's when you really, like, you just cut your carbohydrates. You slowly taper off the volume of food. That's when you might take your laxative to really empty out your gut. So all the food that you ate in that really big refeed meal, I guess you could call it, has emptied your system. Your guts are empty. Your bowels are empty. But you've had the benefit of that really big meal. So now that you're not exhausted, you're not coming into weigh-in looking like a zombie going, holy crap, I haven't eaten in 2 weeks, because you had that really, really big bowl of pasta 2 days ago. And it's that the positive effects are still there. Right. So that's a really, really important thing that I think people need to understand, is that don't get scared. Like, you have to almost be arrogant with your weight cuts. You can't be like stressing out thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to make it. And then do silly things, because you'll just impair your performance too much. So yeah, the nutrition's a very, very delicate one, I guess.
Right. Yeah. This is all awesome, by the way. I think people are going to really enjoy your perspective on this. What was I going to say? Okay, so one of the things that I noticed with the prolonged caloric deficit, because and the reason I keep going back to this is maybe it's not as prominent in the powerlifting community, but I come from a bodybuilding background, so yeah, I primarily deal with people who have physique goals as well. So they also want to look a little bit lean, or maybe lose a little bit of body fat, do powerlifting as well. Even if powerlifting might be their main focus at the moment, they still want to be relatively lean. So what I've found is that when we try to cut body fat, and we're doing the prolonged deficit, say over the course of, I don't know, 8 to 12 weeks or whatever, and then on top of that we try to do the reduction in carbs, and then the water cut and all that stuff, it is just a disaster, and it doesn't work as well. So I think the reason, or at least part of the reason why you're able to cut that much water weight, is because you aren't afraid to eat in the weeks leading up to the meet, right? So you have lots of glycogen to pull from, and as you know, glycogen holds water, so you have lots of water to pull from. Whereas if your body is depleted going into that water cut, it's going to be I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to pull that water out.
Yeah, because that water has to come from other sources. Yeah,
so I think that with that in order for that approach to be successful in the way that you found it to be successful, I think that eating into the meat, in your prep into the meat, is really, really important.
Yeah, exactly right. And you need to be comfortable and say, like, 2 weeks out, I'm 4 kilos over, and I don't want to lose any more weight. So, and even then, like, your approach it will work, right? So, someone's over, you have a caloric deficit for 12 weeks, but that caloric deficit has to end at some point, and it has to end earlier than I think people want to believe. It has to end 2 weeks out. And 2 weeks out, you might have said, okay, great. Over the last 10 to 12 weeks, I've lost 3 kilos. Like my morning weight average is 3 kilos down. You know, some of it was fat, hopefully. But from now, I'm going to go into a calorie maintenance. And you have to maintain for at least a week. Yeah. At least a week, let's say probably even 2, before you start your actual water cut. Because like you said, if you try and start a water cut from a deficit, like you said, it's going to be a disaster. You're already depleted. How much more can you drain out of your system to squeeze out that last few kilos, a few pounds? It just doesn't work. So, yeah, you're right. You have to come in eating. You have to come in fed. And that last 2 weeks, I mean, we're just talking about weight here. We're just talking about body weight. But you got to think about how that affects your performance. The last 2 weeks, that's when you might be doing your openers, your seconds even in training. You might be doing heavy doubles, heavy ones. Like, you don't want to come into training super depleted. Like, you want to come into training, you know, a little bit fed, a little bit, like, you know, with a bit of energy. So the last 2 weeks, I'm just going to say I don't think you should be in a caloric deficit. I think you should be eating. Yeah. So, yeah, calorie deficit, great. Do that for a prolonged period prior to the last week or so, or 2 weeks.
Yeah. I just want to get your opinion on an approach that I tried successfully. So for the Canadian Nationals in 2014, it was my best ever meet. I managed a 446 Wilks, which is my best performance in meet. So good for a bodybuilder like me.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
What I did leading into that meet was I was already at 74 kilos, dead on.
Like average morning weight, say like a week out.
Yeah. No, like 10 weeks out. I was just 74. And what I did was I slowly hiked my calories up. I probably started 12 weeks out at something like 2,600 calories a day. And then by the time I was a week out, I was eating 3,600 calories a day. So I actually increased my intake by about 1,000 calories a day. People might be skeptical about how I didn't gain weight, like how I maintained on the same. Yeah, I mean, by increasing my calories that much.
But
I probably just expended more through my training or something. But whatever the case was, I was getting away with eating a lot more food. And I didn't really do any water cut or anything. I was just careful about it, you know, like the night before I made sure I didn't like drink a ton of water or anything like that. But I kind of just woke up and weighed in what I weighed in at. So my question... Sorry.
What did you weigh in at?
It was in the high 73s. It was like probably 73.5 or something like that. Fairly close. Not as close as you cut it, but it was. You know, I was pretty much up there. Do you think I would have been better off trying to gain weight, like say 10 weeks out, actually weighing 78 kilos or something like that, and then doing a water cut, or do you think that as long as I'm eating enough, then the way I did it was good enough?
I reckon, say for example, when you were at that point, 12 weeks out, when you're having your 2,600 calories,
yeah,
and you weighed 74.00, say your morning weight was averaging that, I think, and you increase your calories, I think I would have, if I was in your shoes, and I was, because obviously I'm not as strict with my diet as you are, obviously.
Yeah.
But if I was in your shoes and I had the decision ahead of me, I would have probably been even more aggressive with the amount of food that you would have taken in.
Yeah.
I moved up a weight class last year, so last year I competed at Worlds at 66, and then I said to myself, I'm going to spend the next 6 months in the 74s, but, it's just my nature. I didn't want to compete at 74s weighing 71. I was like, well, if I'm going to compete at 74, I'm going to do my best to fill it out, right? So I ate heaps. Like, I have no idea what my calories were like, but I just ate all the time. I put on weight really quick. I got up to 78.5 morning weight, I think. And during that period, I did it all in like 10 weeks. Like, I just put it all, a lot of it was fat. But in that 10-week block, also before the Junior Nationals in August, I was hitting PBs every week, or PRs. Yeah. Every week I was like, oh, I've never lifted this much weight before. Bang, did it for a triple. Oh, we've never done this before. Hitting this, like just hitting PBs week in, week out, just because I was putting on weight. Like, there was no way that my central nervous system was increasing in efficiency that quickly. It was simply having more mass that made me lift more weight. And I think it was that, particularly that 6-month block, that really kind of sold it to me, saying, like, being heavier just makes you lift more weight. Like, my Wilks score went down considerably. Like, I put on more weight than I put on strength, but the strength just came, like, just by weighing more. So I think what I'm trying to get at is, if you were 74 and then say 12 weeks out, and then say you got to 77-ish, say 3 weeks out, and then held at 77, and then just did a really quick, cheeky water cut over one day, like 3 kilos is honestly nothing. Like, it comes off. All you need to do is stop drinking water for 15 hours or so, have a small dinner, take a week laxative, and 3 kilos just comes off. And then you got 2 hours. That's plenty of time to put on back 2 or 3 kilos. Instead of weighing 74, you would have weighed 77, and you would have lifted a little bit more weight.
Right.
And your Wilks score wouldn't have been affected because your official weigh-in would have been roughly the same, right? 73.5 or 6 or whatever it might have been. So, yeah, I'm just such a big fan of being heavier. Like, whatever you weigh, just be as heavy as you can manage while making your weight class. I do need to quickly actually touch on the fact that it has less of an effect when you're bigger. Like, bigger people don't see the benefits as much.
Right.
So, percentage-wise, obviously, on total.
Let's quickly outline the specifics here. So I'm assuming you wouldn't recommend as drastic of a cut for a beginner or an intermediate.
No way.
And then is there a difference between male and females? So give us some like direct numbers. Like you can probably get away with cutting this many kilos if you're, a beginning female and then an advanced female, advanced female.
So on that, beginners just never cut weight. Like I've got a guy at the gym that's competing in a month or so, just under a month, 4 weeks or so. And he weighs 96, and he signed up for this meet yesterday, and he said 93s or 105s. I said 105s. Don't even waste your time. Like beginner, if it's your first comp, don't even look at the weight classes. Just whatever you weigh is whatever you weigh. Don't even waste your time. People say, I want to be competitive, I want to do this. And I always say, your first meet is like such a small blip in your career. Like think back to your first meet, Jeff. It was like, you look back at it and like almost laugh at yourself and go, what was I doing? Like I had no idea what I was doing. So don't even worry about it. First comp, don't even waste your time. Depending how competitive you are, maybe start to consider it third, fourth, fifth comp. But really, for the first year, don't even waste your time. It's just waste of energy. In terms of how much can you get away with, wow, that's a very loaded question. The rule of thumb that I've always been told by Mr. Robert Wilks himself, who's the CEO of Powerlifting Australia and the dude who comes up with the Wilks formula and he does a bunch of cool stuff. He always tells me 4%. 4% of body weight and you can get away with it. Okay. So cut 4% and there is no detriment to performance. That's his rule of thumb. I've kind of taken that a little bit further and I've done 8% myself. So I'm going to say 8%. So 8% of body weight, what's that? For my body weight, 8 times 70 kilos is 5.5 kilos. So that's about right, 8% for me. The only little, like I said earlier, the only little time that might not work out as well is 8% for, say, for example, a 120 kilo guy. Like, that's like 11 or 12 kilos, which percentage-wise is like the same, obviously, but you just won't see such a benefit in your total. Like cutting 12 kilos as a 120 or 10 kilos as a 120, it just doesn't have the same performance benefits because, as we said before, as your body weight increases, sure, your strength increases, but that doesn't scale well when you're like when you're really, really big. So because all that weight that you put on is just going to be fat. Like it's really hard to put on muscle naturally at that body weight. So it's less of a benefit for bigger guys. Men and women, wow, that's a different question as well. I don't have personal experience not being a woman, so that kind of makes it difficult in that regard. But the theory is there. So, I mean, I actually get, funnily enough, I get such mixed feedback from the girls that I coach. And I do ask them, especially the ones that I'm close with, I do ask them personal questions. And like menstrual cycle stuff is stuff that's important and timing of that around meets. Some people say that they hold weight more at the time. Some people say they drop water weight at the time. I get different stuff all the time. So with women, it's a lot more difficult. So I am a lot more conservative with my girls. I go, so with the girls, obviously, because of the hormonal response to such drastic changes in hormones over the course of obviously 4 or 5 weeks, is be a lot more conservative, be safer, because you don't want to come into a period, into the meet, when all of a sudden, just hormonally, you just hold more water, and it makes it a lot harder than we were anticipating. So a lot more inconsistencies there. And as well, like, I know it's a little bit of a generalization, and I mean, I don't want to offend anyone, obviously, but I do find, in my experience, that girls tend to be a little bit more anxious. They get a little more stressed out when it comes to meets. They're not as confident. They're not as, arrogant as men are, to be honest, because men are arrogant. I'm arrogant when it comes to meets. I'm confident with my body weight. I come in saying, you know what, I'm 5 kilos over, perfect. I don't want to drop anything else. But if I had one of my girls coming in 3 or 4 kilos over, they freak out. They get nervous. They get anxious. They start doing silly things like starving themselves 2 weeks out. So, again, I say cut it safe. Go into your caloric deficit. Be at your weight class or be 1 or 2 kilos over. Don't do silly things like cutting huge amounts of weights unless you're at the absolute top end and you're willing to take those risks. But if you're at an intermediate level competing at nationals, it's not worth the time there for the girls.
Right. And do you ever have trouble sleeping the night before the weigh-in? Like when I've had to cut a bit of weight, I've found it to be a little bit stressful, especially if I'm a little over, and you're a lot over. So usually,
That's a really good question, actually. The sleep the night before is a good one. I've only ever once competed without a weight cut. I lifted, it was an equipped comp, so I didn't bother cutting for it was just a local meet equipped. And I came in weighing 71, and it was at the time that I did that competition, I was already fairly experienced. I'd already won a Worlds. I'd competed internationally 3 times, twice at a more regional level, done an Open National, so I was reasonably experienced already. And I was just competing at a local meet, like my local gym was hosting a competition, and they asked me to lift. I was like, yeah, I'll lift for you guys. I'll lift equipped. I might make it some fun. So been training equipped, but I really struggled to sleep, like just because I was nervous, and I wasn't expecting myself to be nervous for a local contest. I was like, yeah, whatever, like this will be a breeze. But I was nervous and I couldn't sleep, and it was probably the same as coming into a Worlds. Like I slept probably the same. Maybe I got my 4 or 5 hours. So I found that really interesting that even though I wasn't dehydrated, I found it difficult to sleep more so because how nervous I was, less so about the dehydration. The other thing as well is it depends on the timing of your weigh-in. So if you're assuming a morning weigh-in, it makes it hard because say your weigh-in's at like 7 a.m. and my rule of thumb is 15 to 18 hours of water cut. So you might stop your water, say for a 7 a.m. weigh-in. You might cut your water like, what's that, 11 a.m. or midday the day before. So you get to sleep that night really dehydrated. And it genuinely does make it hard to sleep. The best weigh-ins you can get, like I'm competing at the Oceanias in 3 weeks. I've got a weigh-in that's at like, I think off the top of my head, maybe 12 or 1. Because that's perfect. Because I'm going to actually start my dehydration pretty much when I go to sleep. Like, I'm going to have a sip of water and go to sleep like an hour later. So then you don't sleep dehydrated. You actually sleep quite well hydrated. That brings me on to another point of people who like to sauna the day before. Man, I'm really not a fan of that because trying to sleep dehydrated makes it really hard. Like sleeping thirsty is really difficult. So if you can just sauna off all your weight the last minute, it helps everything else. It makes you sleep better. The last thing I will say is that if you can get sleeping pills that are obviously legal and not on the banned list at all, that really helps. So like I said before, take advantage of every route you can to improve your performance. If you can take a sleeping pill to help you sleep or to relax you, then that's very beneficial also.
yeah. What about people who are just stressed about cutting it that close? Like, I've got a couple kilos to go. I'm not afraid. I'm not sure I'm going to pee that out. Do you ever have to deal with that as a coach? I mean, I know you're very confident yourself because you've done this a million times.
Yeah, exactly
But
right.
like I've never done an aggressive cut like that just because my off-season weight for bodybuilding kind of lines up nicely with my competition weight for powerlifting and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. You
I
have
never
no
had to
reason
worry about it. But
that's for no reason.
yeah, exactly.
That's where it comes back to what I said before about it's got to be an individualized approach. Like I said,
Yeah,
for example, I know it's very general, but with my girls, I tell them not to cut so much. So if I've got a guy or a girl who I know as a person, and that's where being a coach is important. That's where being personal as a coach is important. If I've got a guy that I'm coaching who I know gets anxious about their lifting, who gets anxious about stuff like this, or they're just an edgy person, then like I won't advocate cutting huge amounts of weight. Like I know obviously I'm a big proponent of it,
yeah,
but it's got to be done in the right context. Don't waste your time cutting 7 kilos for a local competition where you're not looking to break any records or win the comp. Like, if you're going to score less than, say, 380 Wilks or 360 Wilks, and you're just competing locally and you're not going to be breaking any records, and you might not even win, like, don't waste your time. Like, it's just a waste of energy. If you're the kind of person who gets stressed, who sees the scales the night before and freaks out, like, don't do it. Don't do it to yourself.
yeah,
So, yeah, that's where the individualized approach is really important. And there aren't many people that can. Like, it takes experience. And my cuts have been getting bigger and bigger because I've become more confident over time. So, I mean, it wasn't like I said, hey, you know what? If I want to be competitive, I have to cut heaps of weight. I want to be really big. I just drew up these outlines based on all this theory that I have. And I just came into my first comp 6 kilos over. Like, there was no way that was going to happen because I was saying, I was nervous. I was like, is this really going to work? And it worked really well. I was like, wow, maybe next time. And that's where being meticulous with tracking your body weight every day, morning and night. So you know what you did last time, you know what you're going to do this time. Said, hey, last time I weighed in half a kilo under, so this time I can probably come in weighing half a kilo more. And then you do your weight cut a little bit more aggressively. You make weight again. You go, wow, that worked. And I wasn't affected. Next time I'll come in a little bit heavier. Next time I'll come in a little bit heavier. Next time I'll come in a little bit heavier. Well, here's my limit. I can't come in any heavier than this because this was really hard. So knowing your body really well is important, and getting practice and experience with it. Yeah, like I said, if you're going to cut weight, the first time you should do it, cut maybe half a kilo, like 1 pound, 2 pounds. But then you get better at it over time. You become more confident over time. So that's where the whole individualized thing is important, because if a guy isn't confident, the detriment isn't physical, it's mental. They come in exhausted because they've been stressed for 2 days. Like, not worth it again.
Right,
It's
right.
a fine line.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of refeeding after the weigh-in, are there any particular foods that you go to or foods that you avoid? And then the same goes for rehydration. Do you use special formulations or water, or what do you do there?
That's a good question. Like I said before, I'm not a dietitian. I haven't studied anything in that regard, but I've got some general principles that I kind of go off, and they're very, very simple. So things like fats are slow to digest, so don't waste your time trying to have fats. Like things that are high in fat are just going to sit in your gut, not be digested, and just be dead mass sitting in your stomach, right? You need stuff that's fast digestible. So when it comes to carbohydrates, the same principle applies. Taking high glycemic index foods, right? Taking sugars high in sugar, taking foods that are going to be absorbed really quickly. Again, other rules of thumb. Water is absorbed a lot quicker than food. So, and you can only take in so much into your stomach before you feel full, right? Like 10 minutes after I weigh in, I'm already full.
Yeah.
So you don't want that stuff in your stomach to be water, because that'll just absorb real quick anyway. You're better off trying to take in as much food as you can early, so that way that has time to kind of get into your systems ready for the weigh-in, ready for lifting. And you can scull your water later. Like, you don't have to take in your water straight away. It only takes 10 or 15 minutes for water to start absorbing through your stomach. So don't over stress the water, even though it's the water that you've cut. It's the sugar that you need to get into your bloodstream. It's the glycogen that you need to replace. So kind of the go-tos that I have, bananas. I really like fruit, so bananas and apples, easy to chew, easy to digest, good sugar, chocolate, lollies. I mean, in Australia we have Nutella. Yeah, is that candy?
I don't know what
Um,
that is.
candy, lollies are
Okay,
candy.
okay.
Yeah. In Australia we have Nutella. I don't know if you have. Do you have
Oh
Nutella?
yeah, we have it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I take in a lot of Nutella. I take in just stuff that's easy to chew, easy to digest, stuff that's not going to sit in your stomach.
Right.
And obviously things that you're used to eating. Like, don't go, oh, JP said I need to have Nutella, so I'm going to have it. But you've never had it before, and it makes you feel sick. Like, that's the worst thing that could ever happen. So stuff that you've had before, stuff that you might take before training. In terms of, like, energy drink's really good, obviously. It's like sports drinks that have sugar in them already, electrolytes. And the big one that you need to take in as well is sodium. Like, you need to take in as much sodium as you can. That's one that people forget. So I had taken, like, lots of salted chips. Just add salt to stuff. Like, I just pour salt onto things.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, if you've water cut it properly, you've just really cleaned out your system of all sodium. So you need to take that all back in.
Yeah.
And that's not, like, those electrolytes aren't just coming back from those energy drinks. You need to have, like, pretzels, salted chips, just whatever it takes to replace that salt. So, I mean, like I said before, I'm real competitive. I do take things to the extreme. I'm very, very extreme with my approach. To the point where, like, I walk into my weigh-in with my coach. Like I said, Robert Wilkes coaches me at international levels. So he'll come into me with weigh-in. He knows all my attempts. He signs off all the forms. I literally come in just wearing nothing but a pair of shorts. I step onto the scales nude. I step off the scales, and I've got 2 bananas with me already. I bring the bananas into the weigh-in with me that are already open. As soon as I step off the scales, I, like, shove them into my mouth, drink a bit of water, flush it down. I start spooning Nutella. All the meantime, Robert's signing off the form saying, yep, these are the openers, blah, 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 blah. This is John Paul. Show them my passport, identify. All the while, I'm still eating in the background, going, chew, 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 drink, drink, drink. I walk out of the way and it's like holding banana peels and an empty 2-liter bottle of Gatorade. Because I'm not going to wait 5 minutes to get outside. I'm going to start doing it right now, like, I take it to the extreme. So, yeah, the go-tos are easy to digest foods, high sugars, low fats, and stuff that you've taken before,
Yeah.
I guess is kind of rule of thumb.
Yeah. I think that's a good point about the energy drinks. Like, I like those, but they're actually not really high in sodium. Like, there's not a ton of sodium in those. So one of the things that maybe people could do is, like, just actually shoot at, like, half a teaspoon of salt and pound that back with some water. That's an approach, I've used for bodybuilding contests, for
100%,
rehydration and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's not that, it's kind of gross, but it's like, whatever, like, you've done all this stuff. You can just shoot back a little bit of salt. And
If you can shoot back a bit
help.
of salt with tequila, you can shoot back a little bit of salt.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to talk a little bit about peaking for a meet when it comes to training, and your approach there. So how does training differ for you from off season to meet prep in terms of your frequency, intensity, volume, and exercise variation, or anything else?
That's a good question. I'm not super extreme on that regard. Like, I don't do kind of anything revolutionary. It's pretty standard
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, stuff that most people kind of already do or are aware of. So obviously in the off season, it's depending on what you're trying to achieve. It's kind of just cleaning up your weaknesses, bringing up stuff. I do try to avoid competition lifts. Like, I mean, I compete in the sumo, and like, just for example, last year, I sumoed last in on Christmas Day. Christmas Day, I went to the gym real quick, squeezing some sumo deadlifts. I know I'm crazy. But then from that day, I didn't actually do one sumo deadlift until I'm gonna say sometime in March. I think I went 9 weeks without ever doing a deadlift with a sumo stance. And the one time I did it was I did like 3 sets of two, like a week out from that equipped comp because I competed equipped sumo. So I was like, I better quickly practice how to do these again. And it's kind of like the old saying, like, it's like riding a bike. Skills don't really go away very much.
Yeah.
So in the off season, I'm happy to take some time away from the competition lifts, um, and move more towards like lots of variation, building a really strong base. I think that's what you see a lot of times, and not just in powerlifting, but in like all sports. Like, I saw this a lot when I was doing athletics, is guys get really caught up, especially juniors, with trying to get like the best results and the best progress as they can, as quick as they can, and they see really good success because they're really specific with their training, and they see really good success. So I've seen guys like win national championships when I was a junior competing in athletics, and then end up nowhere as an open. Like, they don't make it at all as a senior performer because they've got kind of nothing to build on. They're really, really good at their craft, and they can't get any better because they've got no base. So right now I'm happy to kind of progress a little bit slower if it means it sets me up better long term. So building a really strong foundation is really important. I mean, I like lots of variation. I like my front squats. I like high bar stuff. I like close grip on the bench. Like I said, I like doing heaps of conventional deadlifts, even though I compete sumo, just because you want to kind of be well-rounded. I mean, the example that I always use is if someone front squats 250 kilos, I bet my bottom dollar that they low bar back squat more than 250 kilos. Like, you can't kind of just be good at your lift. You kind of have to be strong at everything. So building a big base of strength through heaps of variation, lots of sets of 6, sets of 8, sets of 10 is really important. So if I'm like months and months and months out, I just do heaps of that stuff. A little bit less structured. I'll come in and say, today I want to deadlift conventional 3 sets of 3 at this weight, but then I'm going to do heaps of GHR, heaps of glute bridges with unprescribed weights, maybe a rough guideline on reps and sets. So it's a lot more varied. Obviously, coming into a meet, specificity is really important. So the intensity rises, like relative intensity, like percentages in terms of, and a lot of it is practice. Like, I just do heaps and heaps of practice. Like at the moment, like I said, I'm competing at the Oceania Championships. That's 3 weeks away. And I really want to do something special with my deadlift. Like, it's my last competition as a junior. So I am kind of putting my squat a little bit on the back burner just to squeeze out one last kind of chance at anything really special in the deadlift before I kind of taper that off into next year. So I'm deadlifting 3 days a week, and only one of those days a week is really heavy. And people say, deadlifting 3 days a week, like, you're crazy. And I'm like, no, it's okay. It's light. So a lot of it's practice, a lot of it's just skill acquisition, cleaning up stuff, making things kind of perfect. So you execute on the day. So, to me, it's high percentages, 80 to 90%, lots of singles, ones and twos and threes, and lots of competition specificity. Like, I'm not really doing much front squats, not really doing much conventional. In fact, I'm not conventionaling at all. It's just sumo, low bar squat, competition style bench. That's pretty much it.
Right. So yeah, while you're on the topic of deadlift, so I'm assuming you'll be like kind of doing your openers for singles. Do you do your opener or any second attempts on the deadlift in this remaining 3 or 4 weeks before the meet? Because people are always wary about the deadlift because it's like, oh, you don't want to deadlift too close to the meet because that's gonna fry your CNS and all that kind of stuff. So what is your approach there?
Yeah, that's a good question. As a general rule of thumb, like, my squat programming and my deadlifting programming aren't too dissimilar in terms of reps, sets, and percentages. So, like, if I'm going to do, say, 3 sets of 3 at 89%, I'll do that on squat and I'll do that on deadlift. It doesn't bother me. What I will do, though, is do probably my deadlifts earlier in the week relative to the squats. So that way I do get a little bit more time between deadlift, like last heavy deadlift and comps, and like meets versus last heavy squats. So just for argument's sake, I mean, these are just arbitrary, but say your meet's on a Saturday. So I might do squats on a Saturday, deadlifts on a Tuesday during my training cycle. So that my last heavy deadlift would be on the Tuesday, say, what's that, like 11 days out. And my last heavy squat will be on the Saturday, exactly 7 days out.
Right.
So relatively speaking, I've got a little bit more time between my last, kind of main deadlift session and the meet versus my squats. In terms of like hitting attempts in training, yeah, big fan of hitting attempts, really good for confidence. So what I like to do is roughly 2 to 4 weeks, depending again on the level of the lifter and what it is you're trying to do, is hit seconds. So hit your second in training, and if it's hard, it doesn't matter. Just try and hit a second. So that way you kind of come into your meet and you're in your lifter's ear saying you've done this in training, you know how to do it. Like don't overthink it, you can do it. And I do like to hit openers maybe 10 days out or so, like depending on the lift. A week to 10 days out for squats and deadlifts, and bench a little bit closer again. But I like to do them in doubles. If you can do your opener for doubles, maybe 2 doubles or 3 doubles, that's a big confidence boost as well. It's like if you do 2 doubles at your opener, you've pretty much done your opener 4 times. Like there's no reason why you couldn't do it on the platform. And all those 4 reps that you did your opener at, 2 of them were after already having done it. So like really, really big confidence. Like that's a big thing, especially with like newer guys coming in saying, this is what you've done for reps. So don't stress out about it. And then the third is what you kind of rely on your taper kind of getting you towards. It's your third. That's where you kind of say, well, my second attempt in training was really hard, but today it's not going to be as hard because I'm a fresher. And that's where that extra 5 or 10% is to kind of go for a third.
And what are seconds for you as a percentage of 1RM usually?
That's a good question. Like, pretty much 100,
right.
Like 100%.
Yeah.
So I pretty much, and it depends how you define like RM. So I'd probably define the RM as like a training RM.
Yeah.
So I might put in my training RM. Yeah, I might put in my training RM as whatever it might be, and then hit my absolute training RM in the meet as a second. But it won't look like 100% because you're tapered, because you're fresher.
Yeah.
So it ends up being a little bit quicker.
Right.
So it'll be a weight that you've probably done in training for, if you use an auto regulation style, maybe an at 9.5 or maybe even an at 10. So you would have done, say, for example, in the lead up to Worlds, I squatted 217.5 in training, 217.5 kilo, 480 pounds. So I did that in training, and it was hard. Like, it was really hard, but it wasn't, if anything, it's more of a confidence boost that it was hard, or the fact that I did it is because 2 days before that, I just squatted 6 sets of 3. 2 days before that, I did heavy front squats. So I was like kind of under fatigue. So when you come into your meet and you're going for your second, you go, man, I haven't squatted in like 3 days. Like my legs are fresh. Like I'm ready to go. So then you hit it with a little bit more speed and you're like, yep, I've got more in me. So then you can, add your 7.5 kilos or, 20 pounds or so. So you got a little bit more there. So yeah, hitting him in training is important, especially being under fatigue. I'm really big on the psychological aspect. If you can hit lifts in training under fatigue, knowing that, man, I just had a heavy deadlift session 2 days ago and I'm squatting today and I'm squatting okay, it's going to be so much better on the platform. So that's really good for you mentally.
Right. Yeah, that's an approach I haven't. I usually don't hit seconds in training leading into the meet. I just, from a fatigue standpoint, I feel like that could, backfire a little more easily than just going a little lighter. Like, I usually don't go higher than 90 or 92. So, something like that when I'm doing a percentage based programming. But I for confidence, I can absolutely see how that would really help. But you're also peeking into the meet, so like you said, it depends on how you define RM. So your true RM is probably a little bit higher than the 100% that you're plugging in anyway, right? So
yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So you come in, you do lifts. Like I just feel like you should do your seconds. Your seconds should be stuff that you've done before, because if you take like a reasonable jump to a third, like say for example your PR deadlift is 250. Right, coming into a meet, like the best you've ever lifted is 250 kilo, 550 pounds. If you come in knowing that's your PR, your second attempt, I'm not a big fan of second attempts being PRs. Like I'm not a fan of your second attempt being 255, because even if you get that 5 kilo, 11 pound PR, like how much more have you got in you in your third? Like, are you genuinely coming into a meet expecting a 15 kilo, 33 pound PR? Like if you are, unless your training's been really good, that's pretty ambitious. So I prefer guys to come in, say, for example, your deadlift PR is 250 kilo, 550 pounds. I prefer guys to come in, do their seconds at 247.5 or 250. Go, yep, I've done this before. Now I can build on it at 7.5, at 10 kilos, get your third.
Right.
You finish the day getting 3 out of 3 on your lift, 7.5, 10 kilo PR. you're happy with that. Like there's no real
Yeah.
downside, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. How far out are you hitting those seconds generally? Say for the squat.
Say for a squat, I'd say 8 plus 7 is 15 days. I tend to do maybe
Okay.
15 days, and then for a deadlift, maybe 19.
Okay.
19 days
Okay.
is
Okay.
like my
Yeah.
kind of go-to.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
but again, it just depends. Like, there's so many variables. Like,
Yeah.
obviously,
No, I,
right?
I I understand. I'm just trying to get a general picture of your
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Like, so for example, I did a heavy deadlift yesterday, and what is yesterday? Yesterday was Friday. Or for me, it was Friday anyway, Friday the 27th, and I'm lifting on December the 16th. So that's yeah, about 20 days out. So it actually kind of lines up with what I was saying before. So it just depends. I mean, I've had guys do it later, like, and that's when you need to adjust, right? Say you're in the middle of your training block between 10 and 3 weeks out, and they're like struggling, like things are a lot harder than you would have liked. You might say the taper has to be longer or more aggressive, so we'll change this, change that. And
Yeah.
that's where the coaching aspect kind of comes into it. You need to kind of watch over your lifters and make sure that they're recovering, and you make adjustments as you kind of go. But yeah, I'd say 15 to 19 days out for squats and deadlifts for your seconds, and bench you can kind of get away with it being a bit later. Maybe 12 or 10 days out.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that, man. So let's quickly touch on meet week itself and what your training looks like for meet week, and then I'll forward everyone to that video if they haven't watched it already, because that'll put this whole conversation in a lot of context. So, yeah. What do you do meet week?
Yeah, cool. The week of the competition tends to vary particularly for me. So this probably doesn't apply to like too many people, but it definitely is something that's probably pretty interesting because I do a lot of my competitions like internationally or like away from home. It varies like heavily, so it does make it stressful. Ideally, say I do have competition at home. Like I had my nationals here in Melbourne actually, so that was pretty handy. So if it was at home, it kind of tends to be like a week out, like I said, so 7 days out. Might do my squat doubles in training. Next day or the day after, I might do some bench doubles. And so in terms of the training, and then for the next few days, it's just all singles. Like I don't do anything more than singles. I'm very big on specificity, very big on mental imagery. So I'm a bit like kind of anyone that trains under me knows it's the 6 sets of 1. That's what I do, 6 sets of 1. So I do 6 sets of 1 on squat, bench, and deadlift. During that last week, no training the last 2 or 3 days, again, depending how fatigued you are. But it's a 6-1. So I do 6-1s at maybe anything between 65 and 80%, depending on fatigue levels and stuff. And I tell all my guys, like, say your meet PR deadlift is 250. I want you to do 6 sets of 1 at 200 kilos, 6 days out or 5 days out. But every time you approach the bar, in your head, you have to think it's 260 kilos. Like, you've got to think this is your third attempt. You've got to look at that bar and think that this is about to crush you and you have to do everything you can to pull it. And I tell my guys, stand on platform, and I want you to look up in training, in the gym, and I want you to see, like, look into the referee's eyes. I want you to look into the lights that are like shining onto the platform. I want you to hear people in the crowd calling out your name. Like, go Jeff, go Jeff. You need to hear that stuff. But like in those last few singles in your week, real like prepare for you mentally kind of thing. Last few days is obviously when I do my big weight cut, which we spoke about. So you want to try and move as little as you can, sleep as much as you can, eat when you can, and eat when you don't have, or not eat when you don't have to. And then obviously get into the venue and stuff. Again, move as little as I can. Like we're pretty lucky with the Powerlifting Australia. They look after us. You got guys that kind of come with you and hold your bags for you and put the headphones in your ears when you need to and bend over if you drop something so you don't need to waste your energy. So that's pretty lucky. When you move internationally, it makes it really hard. Like I'm going to Uzbekistan for this Oceania Championships, and my flights are like, I think I leave 8 days before I lift. And Uzbekistan, it's in, which for those who don't know, it borders Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, a whole bunch of places in Central Asia. Getting there is really hard. So I'm going to fly from Melbourne to Korea. That takes 10 hours. Then I've got a 19-hour layover in Korea. Then I've got an 8-hour flight to Tashkent, and then an hour bus ride to where I'm staying. So that's like a 40-plus hour commute. So that really does throw stuff into the works. Like I said, I'm flying 8 days out, and that's kind of when I want to be doing my heavy squat doubles. So again, that's where being versatile with your programming is important, because I'll need to change that. I don't know what the training venue is going to be like there, if I'm going to be able to train. So yeah, it makes it a little bit harder. But the last week tends to just be about, I guess, the overall themes about recovery, obviously, and practice. Just dialing things in, making sure your technique's on point, your mental game's ready to go. You know what your attempts are ahead of time, and you're ready to take on your thirds, because everything's about taking on thirds and going 3 out of 3 on each leaf.
Yeah, exactly. All right, JP. Well, looks like we're about there for time. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you? You offer online coaching and programming for powerlifters. Where can people learn more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a couple of places. Thanks, Jeff, for having me, firstly. So I guess social media wise, you can kind of follow my YouTube channel. I think just search John Paul Cauchi. I'm not even super familiar. I'm only new on YouTube, just posting a couple of things irregularly. So you can jump there. I'm on Instagram quite regularly, a bit more frequently. My Instagram name is @strong, but I use 5 instead of an S, so it's 5TRONG. On Facebook, I'm on Facebook as well. Facebook.com/JP Cauchi is my athlete page. If you're interested in finding out more, you've got any questions, or you are looking at online coaching, send me an email. It's jcauchi@live.com. So that's my surname, JCAUCHI@live.com. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to help you guys out or answer any questions you might have about programming or coaching. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much all the social media streams that I use. I'm not on Twitter or anything like that, so don't bother looking for me there. But no, thanks for having me, Jeff. It's been a pleasure. No, nice chatting about some little particular things. It's kind of stuff that I don't really get to talk about this kind of like in-depth stuff with many people. So kind of cool to kind of express all the stuff that's buried in the back of my head and share it with yourself and all your listeners. So thanks very much for having me.
Oh yeah, the pleasure is all mine. So thanks once again, JP, and yeah, maybe we'll do this again sometime.
100%, mate. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye.